So Dahlia and Daniel, I see you're on Zoom. Could you do me a favor and send an email reminding me that you were here today on Zoom? Just so I give you credit for participation. Okay? Okay. Well, I'm taking that as a yes. So, Byzantine Empire, kind of where we want to start today. I have some things I'm going to show you, and then I have quiz 3 to talk about before the end of the class. So, anyway, we talked about Justinian, Theodora. Here is the Byzantine Empire at the death of Justinian in 565. And so here you see, we got this area, this coastline of the Mediterranean and North Africa, the Middle East, much of what is present-day Turkey and Greece, and Italy. And so I want to kind of go with, oh, here it is. I got another map in here too. It kind of says the same thing. And basically what it says is that this is the Byzantine Empire in 527, which is the red part. And these are what the Byzantines conquered between 527, 565. What I showed you was at the death of Justinian at 565. And so Justinian actually conquered much of all of this and so that's really kind of what he did. It was his job, or he saw it as his job, to re-establish the Roman Empire. So as you see on this map at his death, he had actually kind of went back and reconquered about half of this area. It's important to know because it really will affect what happens in the future. So Justinian, like Constantine, was a Christian and spread Christianity along with his territorial conquest here. And so this is a place right here, Ravenna. I'm going to ask you to remember that. And so here is Theodosius the first in attendance on the south side of a pedestal of an obelisk. Oh, we've seen obelisks before. They're long, tall, and have a point on the end. At the Hippodrome, which is kind of like Circus Maximus we saw in Rome itself. Hippodrome means place where they race horses or show horses. And so you say, well, the root word is like hippo. Isn't that like that big chubby animal that lives in the water half the time? I saw one at the zoo. It's called a hippo, right? So what's the connection? Basically from the Latin anyway, hippo means horse. And those hippopotamus means that it's a water horse. Just say. And so anyway, what happened, kind of a nice segue, is that in 527, no, 526, 525. Anyway, early 6th century Common Era. Byzantine Empire is experiencing some internal difficulties. They have rioting in the streets. The people are unhappy, and they're about ready to throw Emperor Justinian out on his ear. And in fact, he had some boats waiting for him, ready to leave town. And his wife, Theodora, said, no, Justinian, get back in your throne. You're the emperor. Get your army, put this riot down, stand up, reassert your authority. And he did. He was successful. And it launched what would have been kind of a nondescript time as emperor into one of the most noteworthy emperors of the whole Roman Empire era. And so what he does after he consolidates his power in Constantinople, he goes out and he's going to reclaim what was the former great Roman Empire. And so he goes to this place. It's Ravenna, Italy, and I'll show you this on the map. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but I should have put this slide. Ravenna, right here. And so you see, got a red dot and an X through it. A victory for the Byzantines. And so you can see he goes up here 635-ish, goes up here, and then comes around through this way, reconquers Naples, Rome, Ravenna, Justinian, and his armies. Ravenna was kind of a big deal because that had been conquered by the Germanic people from North Central Europe. And so it was under the occupation of Germanic tribes. And he got it back. And he rebuilt the place. And it was one of the early victories for Justinian. And so they poured a lot of money into this place. And they built it as gratitude, as thanks, praise to God. Christianity ruled. And so anyway, San Vitale Church in Ravenna, and take a look at this. This is really quite elaborate. The best marble, the best stone. It's elaborate, it's decorated, and it's really kind of, I'll show you the views. Yeah, this is what it looks like on the outside. San Vitale. And this is a kind of architecture that basically starts with Justinian and persists through another chapter that we'll see. It's called Romanesque art. And so this is like way different than just about anything we've seen so far. One difference is that it's basically made of brick, clay. Back when we were talking about the Etruscans and we saw their statues and their sarcophagi built, made of terracotta, clay. Well, that's really what they had a lot of, and in the ensuing 600 years or so, they really perfected brick making and terracotta. And so they're doing brick, just like in modern times. Bricks. You got a lot of clay, you fire them, you shape them, make brick. They're really, really hard, good building material. And if you have the concrete, the mortar to put these things together, you have something that's really quite strong. Just an aside, did you know that St. Louis was a place that made brick? It was one of the best, biggest brick manufacturers in the United States for a long time. They don't do that so much anymore, but there are places that are now parks that used to be clay, what they call clay digs, and they would make brick. And so that's why you see, like, in a lot of this part, a lot of South St. Louis and North St. Louis as well in the city, brick homes, full brick. I live in St. Louis Hills. Almost all of the homes are made of brick. That's because this is where they made the brick. Anyway, that being said, made of brick, and look at the roof. Tiles, terracotta tiles. So it gives the whole building this appearance of being orange due to the terracotta, due to the clay. And so we're not seeing those yellow sandstone or white marble buildings here. We got the Roman archways, and we talked about that, how the Romans invented the archways, and it's full of arches. And there's another architectural invention that will persist for a long time, and that is this thing right here. Anybody have an idea what this is? It doesn't really show it in the floor plan here so much, but it's important. A stairway so you can climb on the roof and clean the gutters. Not. This is called a buttress. And in Gothic times, medieval times, they'll start to call it a blind buttress, because in that architecture, they start to ornament this and to make it look lighter. But what this is really a structure to kind of hold the weight, disperse the weight, just like an archway disperses the weight of this into that. This spreads the weight of this building out way beyond what we would call the footprint of the building. So it's something that's a buttress, and that's a new thing. And so anyway, other architectural inventions, and you can see this is all kind of based on having brick and concrete to work with. A dome on Penton dives and a dome on squinches, which is kind of what we're seeing here. So anyway, that's San Vitale, and that's the architecture. We'll look at the artwork in a little bit, but I want to, while we're talking about architecture, I do want to show you this. And this was something else built during the reign of Justinian, the Hagia Sophia, Constantinople, Istanbul, Turkey, 532, 537. It's a cutaway view, so it's really just a drawing, if you will. And this is what it really looks like. You see, I put a star by it, partly because it's a World Heritage Site, And it's considered to be one of the most important buildings in Western civilization. And this is Hagia Sophia, which was meant to be a cathedral, and was a cathedral for 500, 600 years. And then we have the spread of Islam. And most of, if not all of the people in this part of the world, modern day Turkey, converted to Islam. And so upon that, they converted the cathedral into a mosque. And we see these structures on the outside. Those are called minarets. And they are part of a mosque. And so anyway, I put this in. I was doing a little research on Hagia Sophia, and it said, with its vast scale, immense cost, and extraordinary speed of erection, and the stunning interior space, the creation of Hagia Sophia in Istanbul between 532 537 Common Era is unparalleled in pre-modern Western architecture. So that's what I'm saying. This is from a book that's just about to be published from Cambridge Publications in England. And so anyway, there are a lot of things that they're still trying to figure out. The nature of the theoretical and material resources to the early designers to achieve this great building, the behavior over the centuries and its much modified structure, the action of environmental loadings, and so on. That's what I was asking you guys about on quiz 2, all of these interdisciplinary connections. And this is like top of the line, up to the moment scholarship. And really that's the kind of questions that we ask. And so here's the interior of the Hagia Sophia. And again, like all of these traditional places of worship, mosques, synagogues, cathedrals, no pews, no benches. And especially true in Islam, where people, worshipers come in and have a prayer blanket that they lay down. Leave your shoes at the door, come in and pray. You worship. And it's not like American churches and modern day churches with the benches, and especially if you're Catholic, they tell you when to stand up, sit down, or kneel. Just say it. But at anyway, look at this vast interior space. Actually, it went up real quick, but they had a false start as well. They were trying to put the dome on this big place, and the dome fell through. It was cutting edge architecture. They had never built a dome quite this large ever, and they really had to invent the methods to put this together. That's what that book is, at least in part about, is that this was like technology that they didn't even really have, and they had to invent engineering to be able to do this. And in fact, it stayed a secret. As I talked about with Greece, they were pretty open about how they made things and their mathematics and stuff. We never knew. We're still trying to figure out how they made such a big dome so long ago. And if you happen to study Italian Renaissance, you'll know that Brunelleschi put a dome on the Florence Cathedral in the early 15th century. And they had to invent a way to make that too. But this inspired it. They, for centuries, builders were looking at this and saying, how in the heck So anyway, you can see around the perimeter here that these discs are Islamic, and there are inscriptions on them, but there are no images. And in part, the Muslims that when they introduced Islam to this part of the world, one of the fundamental differences between Islam and Christianity, at least at the time, was that they took a completely different view about religious iconography, if you will. They looked at everything quite differently vis-a-vis the second commandment and idolatry and that sort of thing. So anyway, what you're more likely to find in a mosque are inscriptions and quotations from the Holy Book. And so they take a different approach. And so if you take a close look, oops, get a zoom in, you still see there are some of the mosaics still in here, but mostly it's doesn't have those depictions of Christ and the saints and the stories from the gospel and so on. And so anyway, I had another link here that was Hagia Sophia in the news. And the link won't come through on here. I'll brief summary. President Erdogan of Turkey reinstated the Hagia Sophia as a mosque. And as a mosque, it's not a tourist attraction anymore. And there are a lot of religions that are like that there are sacred spaces where only the believers and the worshipers can come in. Now, this was a mosque, and it was that way, except for in, I believe, 1935, it was designated a World Heritage Site, and it was open to the public. And people visited Hagia Sophia in the same way that they visited the pyramids and the Parthenon. And that has recently changed. It has been reinstated as a mosque. And so one of the things that we're going to see here is that change between Christianity and the rise of Islam. That's coming up real soon in the book. And so anyway, Hagia Sophia ended up being really a model for a lot of mosques, especially in Turkey. And so you see here the minarets, we see the domes, the Sultan Ahmed Mosque. And this was constructed between 1609 and 1616, so early 17th century. And so hand-painted blue tiles adorn the mosque interior walls. I don't have more pictures of it. This beautiful, beautiful. And Blue Mosque was included in the UNESCO World Heritage Site in the 1985 under the name of Historic Areas of Istanbul. And this is what I'm talking about. We're still trying to figure out World Heritage, religion. How does that, what are the conflicts there? Let me see. Silage Manigie. I say that? I don't know. Anyway, another mosque in Turkey, same model, domes, minarets, large interior spaces. And this was the previous century, 16th century, 1550-ish. And one of the things that sometimes happens is that mosques, like cathedrals, especially in what we would call the Middle Ages, the time between, say, about 800 and 1800, roughly, is that cathedrals and mosques were often used as mausoleums, and you'll find important people buried in such places. It's not the first time. I showed you guys the Pantheon, and in that Pantheon are Roman emperors, and also in the 16th century, the artist Raphael. So mausoleum, mosque, cathedral, temple. And so, and this is back to San Vitale. And so San Vitale, it was important because it was a place that Justinian reconquered, but it also served as pretty much of a model, as I was saying earlier, of Romanesque architecture. And this is a monastery, churches, monasteries, religious buildings, kind of oftentimes resemble each other. They go according to a plan that is consistent with the belief system. Likewise with mosques, likewise with cathedrals that we'll see. Most of the architectural features tie in quite nicely with the belief system. And so anyway, got something here. What's that called? A buttress. Helps hold it up, just saying. Okay, this is more San Vitale in Ravenna. I'm gonna zoom in, and I'm hoping you guys can see it. This is really kind of we have too much light. Would you mind if I turn off those lights? I don't know how much of a difference it'll make, but we do have light things. So anyway, this is what I want you to see. And this is Christ. And it's a mosaic. And so what we have at this time in Byzantine world is that it's basically unified as Christians. Basically, the Romans established that. And they have kind of made peace with the second commandment about graven images, but I still had to kind of figure out, what did Jesus look like? How should he be depicted? And so in this centerpiece, we see Christ, and over here, it's holding a book. And this will be prominent in the iconography of Christ. Why would he hold a book? It's presumably the Bible, but presumably we're talking about the Old Testament. And in Christianity, they believe that many prophets from the Old Testament foretold the coming of a Savior, a Messiah, Jesus Christ. So that's part of what this is. This is me, I'm Christ. And all these prophets told you I'd come. We got some other things going on here you can't quite see. And we got a couple of angels, and usually attended by angels. And we got, I'll show you here, Saint Vitalis. which is San Vitale. And we have Bishop Ecclesias here. Now we know who's who, partly because you can't see it, but Christ has the halo, and he has the halo with the cross. The angels have a big halo, no cross. Saint Vitalis, San Vitalis. He's got a small halo, and so he's a saint, not an angel, and certainly not Christ. And so anyway, what I'm talking about here is iconography. It's like the overarching thing I want to talk about today. And iconography, by that I mean a standard kind of representation that represents something else. And so an icon on your phone, hit the icon, opens the app. It's something that gets you to somewhere else. It's like a symbol. And so the idea that it is an icon is how they kind of bypass some of the restrictions of the second commandment. Does that make sense? It's not really Jesus. It's a way, like on your phone, it's an icon and it gets you through to Jesus. And at least as someone who had been raised Catholic, and we always had second commandment issues vis-a-vis my friends who were Protestants, especially my friends who were Baptist. And they'd say, "Oh, you Catholics, you're praying to this statue of Mary." And so I, as a young boy, I was like, well, that's what they told me to do. Bottom line, though, is that it is an icon. And it's just a way to get through. You're there reminded of Mary, but that is not Mary. You go that way. I know religion has all kinds of idiosyncrasies. But anyway, here's Throne of Maximus. He was the bishop of Ravenna. And here in the center, we got Jesus. Now, this is a different Jesus than what we just saw. This guy is clean shaven. This guy, he's got a beard. So I think that if you see Jesus today, typically they settled on the bearded Jesus, not the clean shaven Jesus. But it was kind of, because it's iconography, and it is, you want to say something about what this icon represents. You go with young, clean shaven, to remind people that Jesus himself died as a young person, 33, when crucified? Or do you put a beard on Jesus, which indicates wisdom? And beards have been associated with wisdom for millennia. It's not universal, and in fact, a lot of the Greeks like to keep their faces shaved clean. And we see a lot of Roman emperors. We know they're old by how they look, but they don't wear beards. But bearded is kind of a long-standing symbol of wisdom. I tell you about gray beards. Anybody ever heard the term graybeard? It's an academic thing. It's the old professors that have been around for a long time and been teaching for decades. They become deans and stuff like that. They're the graybeards around academia. And you see, I'm a graybeard. Just saying. And so anyway, this is the wisdom. And here, believed to be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I'm thinking this is John here, partly because he was the youngest of the disciples. And so he has got no beard. Anyway, there's all kind of iconography associated with the writers of the four Gospels, to be sure. But Justinian, Bishop Maximanus, and so here's the bishop, here's Justinian. They have some issues too about if you want to portray the emperor and all of the emperor's glory and regalia and power, how does that fit with the depictions of Jesus? And especially when you're putting this is a mosaic in San Vitale. This is inside the church. And so anyway, you see he's got a golden halo, but not a cross. And actually in the Catholic religion, they call him Saint Justinian and Saint Theodora. You say like Saint Constantine and Saint Helena, who was Constantine. So anyway, here we go. And Bishop Maximanus, no halo. But he's got the crucifix there to kind of show is, and we see one of his attendants holding the Bible and the other one holding the incense burner. And on Justinian's side, you got a couple of advisors and you got his warriors. You see the shield. These are depictions of 6th century Roman soldiers. And so that's kind of how art evolves. It becomes much less realistic and much more symbolic. When talking about the representation of Christ, I don't want to upset my screen share, but if you remember in the last chapter, there was this beautiful sculpture from the 4th century. Rome, Christ as Good Shepherd. And this depiction of Christ is done in a Hellenistic, or actually more like a classical Greek style. It's made of marble, and Jesus looks healthy, fit, idealized, as does the lost sheep that he has over his shoulder. Lightly pedicure, manicure. Anyway, they run into some problems here, but they'll get through this. The other thing is, I want to say that, you know, see how the feet are, the clothes, the faces, all of that realism or naturalism starts to fade away at this time. I've been studying, it's been over 40 years since I had my first art history class. So I've watched a lot of these ideas change. But back when I was your age, they had talked about the Middle Ages, where the skill of making naturalistic art in painting, mosaics, sculpture, that it was lost. And they forgot how to do that. To some extent, that's true, but that's kind of like putting the horse behind the cart. Because basically they decided not to portray things in a naturalistic fashion because it pushed it a little too close to graven images. And so anyway, it was a sense of priority and keeping with the religious beliefs. And so we got Empress Theodora on the other wall. This is the north wall, that's the south wall. And there's Empress Theodora, the one that really was the power behind the throne, if you will. And you can see here, she has all of her adornment, but she has a halo. And we're anticipating at the time that she is a saint. And her attendants here, and you see it's quite a different set of people. Got a baptismal font there. But all of this is not a particularly good perspective, and it doesn't seem naturalistic. But you can tell it's a baptismal font, and that's good enough. And so this was the map I was showing you. And so this is, you can see this is what they conquered back. And that's all this pink area, and that's the entirety of the Italian peninsula. So much of all of this was in the hands of the Lombards, the Franks, the Visigoths, and all of these people. And this is in Ravenna, Italy too, and it's a little bit later, but it becomes this kind of center of Christianity. And you can see this whole half dome, that's called an apse, A-P-S-E. That's what that word means. And it's basically the area where the priest would lead the mass, the religious service of the Catholic Church. And there's the altar. And so Saint Apollinaire and sheep become part of the iconography too. I just mentioned about Christ as the Good Shepherd, saw that statue. But in Christianity, they kind of come up with this term, Jesus as the Lamb of God. So sheep become part of the religion. And so transfiguration, and this is in the apse of the Church of the Virgin in Mount Sinai, Egypt, Monastery of St. Catherine. And so we'll zoom in on this. And this is another indication of how the iconography develops. And what we see Christ starting to do a lot is this gesture. And I'm telling you all this because this stuff becomes so standardized. And it's the only really thing going. It's really what they dedicate almost their whole artistic energy towards Christianity. But the idea is that he is giving a blessing, or this could be considered a sign of peace. And again, by this time, we pretty much settled on the bearded Christ. And so I got this. This has everything to do with your quiz. Now, let me make sure my folks on Zoom are seeing what you're seeing. And there it is. And this is Christianography .info. And here we go. We see Mary getting the same kind of treatment. Let me zoom in on this probably because it's a website. Detail from 6th century apse at the Porchet Cathedral, Croatia. So this is another place that Justinian reclaimed. And we see here the Christ child, and depicting Christ as a child also presents problems. But you see he's giving this sign of peace and a blessing. You also see the halo with the cross. Check him out. This is him. Also, Mary becomes standardized too. And basically what you'll start to see is Mary in blue, Mary with a halo. And oftentimes what you'll start to see is Mary in a throne. And so here's an early throne of wisdom in 12th century. Get back to this. Madonna enthroned. We call that a Madonna, actually. But get my screen share back. Good. And so here we go. Virgin, another name for Mary. I want to double check that. And so we got the iconography, and it's not so much that Mary is a queen, although that'll develop after time. She's put on a throne because it's considered to be, it's called a throne of wisdom. And so that's part of the iconography. So you see this whole language developing in Christian iconography. And so here's another Madonna and child, or Virgin and child enthroned. Throne of wisdom. Can't see the cross, but it's there. I also have issues with depicting a Christ child too, because how in the heck do you portray a small child or an infant that is here to save humankind and is all-knowing? Was this idea of being all-knowing something that developed as he matured? Or was he born with all of this knowledge of what he was sent here to do, to know that he was the Messiah, as foretold by the prophets? So anyway, you'll get different kinds of, sometimes even the head will look like be a small body and the head of an adult on there. See, Madonna. And here we're going all the way over where, you know, Croatia, Russia, Egypt, Italy, and so on. Christ's blessing, Monastery of St. Catherine, 6th century. This is an early, but kind of the model, the classic model for Christ. Got the halo with the cross, got the beard of wisdom, got the book foretelling his arrival, his birth, got the gesture, peace, and typically as the Madonna is dressed in blue, typically Christ is dressed in purple. Of course, this is all 1,500 years of wear will take its toll. But see, here we go, and this is this kind of bluish, but kind of the same idea. Beard, Bible, halo, peace. And these are later emperor, empress of the Byzantine Empire. And so anyway, Byzantine icon painting. This is a screenshot. It's not a hot link. But you can actually go on YouTube, and there are people like this guy, Papadopoulos, Theodoros Papadopoulos. He makes this stuff today. It is so standardized that and this guy's got it down. He knows the techniques and he knows the iconography. And so you tell him you want a Madonna enthroned, ooh, he's there. Anyway, and he does it basically the same way that the masters did it in the first 1,000 years of the Byzantine Empire. So yeah, you could do icon painting courses. And so anyway, as we move through the Great Schism, 1054, this part of the world is Eastern Orthodox, which is Christianity basically that originates from Constantinople. And they do Christianity their way. Over here, Catholicism is the Western Christianity headed by the Pope in the Vatican. They split. Their differences are great. And anybody want to guess what this green area is? Islam. By 1054, Islam is huge. And when we study Islamic art, I'll have a map that basically shows you exactly the same thing, except that Islam actually comes up in the next centuries up through this part of Europe as well, and much of the area around the Black Sea and so on. And so here we are, Council of Nicaea, Emperor Constantine in the center. I don't know what the Council of Nicaea did. Now we're talking about religion exclusively. Yes, that's exactly right. Yes, in the 4th century, Emperor Constantine assembled the Nicene Council, the Council of Nicaea, 325. And because Christianity had been flourishing for over 300 years, it was really what we would call disparate. There were a lot of different things. A lot of people were looking at different books of the Bible. They were practicing Christianity in all kinds of different ways. And that's the Nicene Creed. You must be a Catholic. Yeah, I am too. But anyway, it's part of a Mass. And we recite that at every Mass. And basically what it is a declaration. If you believe these things, then you are a Christian. This is what it came up with. It's like 1,800 years old or so. What we have here, we have manuscript illustration, basically drawing and painting with text. This is an art form that survives in the Christian tradition, because if you had a Bible, it was written by hand. It was a manuscript. Manu means hand, script means right. Written by hand. They didn't have printing presses at the time, so all of the books were typically scrolls or books, bound books like we have today with leaf pages. Recto means right, verso means left page. Anyway, just saying. But anyway, that's kind of what you got. This will flourish in Islam too. We're going to look at some Qurans that have this. They really run with this kind of art style and develop it even further. But bottom line is that this is art, and guess what it's dedicated to? It's religion. It is the primary influencer of art through these centuries. And so the Paris Psalter, means a prayer book, temporal and Bellum. Again, more iconography. This is in the late 11th century. You can tell who this is. She's wearing blue. That's the Virgin Mary, Christ's mother, at the halo. But we also know, as I mentioned a moment ago, that John the Apostle was the youngest of the apostles and the only one present when Christ was crucified. Got the skull there. Christ was crucified on Mount Calvary, a place called Golgotha, which means skull, which is what we see here on the bottom. Anyway. I think it's time to talk to you about the quiz. Let me get my page here. And any questions about what I'm saying? Because this is like a time we've covered a lot of years, and kind of like Egyptian art, like it's standardized and then they go with it for a long time. I have a theory about some of that too, and I'll tell you. That is that wrong section. In those cultures, when you're doing standardized art, you're basically making a copy of something that has already been thought through and invented. And so that's kind of the way it is. Share going. And so anyway, when you see cultures that there are still cultures around the world, like Chinese calligraphy, for example. The Chinese calligrapher will be doing essentially the same work that his or her ancestors had done 1,000, 15, 2,000 years ago. And so the art and the skill is in how you do it and how well you do it, not in its newness or invention. Anyway, it's a cultural thing. So here's your quiz. And this is the picture I want you to analyze. Identify the image by subject matter, size, date, media, place of creation. This is a starred slide, so I'll tell you where you can find it. Describe the elements of the iconography and what they represent. Support your answer with information gathered from the internet and the textbook. And so I even got iconography of the Virgin Mary as one of the hot links in my PowerPoint today. But don't confine yourself to just that source. And so when I'm talking about the elements, I mean, even including the style is an element. And so the fact that these are flat, that is an element. The halos, the child, what positions they're taking, how they're, all of that stuff that we've been talking about. And thirdly, would you characterize this artwork as ideal, naturalistic, or symbolic, and why? And I have a sample from a different section, a different time, and I asked them to analyze this one, which I talked about a lot in this class, about the peace sign or blessing, the book, the beard, the purple, the halo with the cross, and so on. And so anyway, this is what the person wrote. It's not perfect, and Wikipedia, I don't know about that so much. But at any rate, if you use Wikipedia, I got a hint for you. Wikipedia entries typically have endnotes, just like I asked you to write endnotes. And it'll have sources, and you can kind of, and a lot of those actually have hot links to the original sources that they cite. And so you can kind of dig around at the end in their endnotes to find out how you can validate their information. And so anyway, what I want you to do is this: file upload, docx or PDF. I didn't mess it up this time. It's actually saying file. And when you do that, when I grade it, I can actually give you feedback on Canvas. It works so much better. And so it's available, been available for about an hour and a half. And it's available through the 15th, which is Friday, Thursday. What's the date? 12, 13. Yeah. And it's due on the 14th, but I left it open another day on Friday because sometimes things happen. And so, you guys up for this? Good. There's like 8 minutes left. What should we do? Anybody know good jokes? See, now that there's social media, YouTube and stuff, everything's online. Used to be that's what you do when you went to work. Heard any good jokes lately? They would kind of circulate verbally in person. It doesn't happen so much. So no good jokes. I guess I'll see you guys on Thursday. And as you might run into something, if you start on this now, and you have any questions, I'll be here on Thursday to answer the questions on this too. So have fun. Thank you.